What if I told you that rock and roll wasn't born in a studio, but in church revivals, street corners, and dance halls where segregation kept people apart, but music brought them together? What if the face of rock, the screaming guitar, and rebellious energy we know today, was shaped not just by Elvis Presley and the Beatles, but by a gospel-singing woman with a guitar in the 1930s, a black teenager from St. Louis with a duckwalk, and a radio DJ who broke the rules? This is the real story of how rock and roll came to be. Not as a single sound, but as a revolution built on rhythm, soul, electricity, and defiance. Before rock, American popular music lived in silos. White audiences were fed sweet, inoffensive pop ballads. Think Perry Como or Doris Day. Meanwhile, black communities were writing the real heartbeat of American music. Rhythm and blues, gospel, boogie-woogie, and the blues. But this music was classified as race records, confined to certain labels, certain stations, and mostly hidden from the mainstream. The problem wasn't a lack of creativity, it was a lack of access. Racial segregation extended to radio waves and record stores. Many white teenagers were hungry for something raw, emotional, and alive. But the music industry kept sanitizing and repackaging the soul out of the sound. That's when the spark happened, and it started with 4 distinct musical roots colliding in the mid-20th century. Rock and roll was never just one genre. It was a collision, a perfect storm where multiple traditions came together to form something explosive. First came rhythm and blues, black artists playing electric guitar with groove and soul. Then gospel, music from the church, filled with spiritual power and soaring vocals. Add country and western, white folk ballads, twangy storytelling, heartache, and hope. Finally, throw in jump blues, upbeat piano-driven dance music that got people moving in underground clubs. When those styles fused together, particularly in the South and Midwest, a new sound was born. It was loud, emotional, sexual, irreverent. It made adults nervous and teenagers ecstatic. But who brought it to life? Before Elvis picked up a mic, before Chuck Berry played his first riff, there was Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Born in 1915 in Cotton Plant, Arkansas, Tharpe grew up singing gospel music in church. But she did something no one else was doing at the time. She plugged her guitar into an amp and wailed. Her performances were electric in more ways than one. In 1944, she released Strange Things Happening Every Day, a gospel song with a rock and roll spirit. One of the earliest records to hint at the sound that would explode a decade later. It wasn't the only contender. Songs like Rocket 88 and Good Rockin' Tonight also stake a claim. But Tharpe's fiery guitar and vocal swagger made her a direct ancestor of rock. She was a black woman playing electric guitar on stage in front of thousands. Little Richard, Johnny Cash, and later generations of rockers cited her as a major influence. Without Sister Rosetta, there might not be a rock and roll as we know it. Alan Freed was a white DJ in Cleveland in the early 1950s. He didn't invent the term rock and roll. It was already black slang for music, dancing, and sex in blues and R&B, but he was the one who blasted it into the mainstream. Freed started playing rhythm and blues records on mainstream radio stations, targeting white teens who were tired of bubblegum pop. He called the music rock and roll, borrowing the phrase from black culture, and it stuck. In 1952, he threw the Moondog Coronation Ball, a packed R&B concert that many consider the first major rock and roll event, though the term wasn't yet solidified. The turnout was so huge the venue had to shut down. Freed broke racial barriers on air and brought black music to white audiences. He wasn't a saint. His career ended in scandal during the Payola investigations. But his influence on spreading rock can't be denied. In Memphis, Tennessee, Sam Phillips's recording studio, later Sun Records, became a laboratory for the new sound. His mission? To capture the soul of the South. He recorded blues legends like Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King, but he was also looking for artists who could bridge racial divides in a segregated industry. In 1951, he recorded Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston and Ike Turner at his Memphis recording service, a song often called the first rock and roll record for its distorted guitar and driving beat. Then, in 1954, A shy truck driver named Elvis Presley, backed by guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, cut a frantic version of Arthur Big Boy. That recording blended country, blues, and gospel. It was raw, fast, and totally new. Elvis became a star, and Phillips launched careers for Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Johnny Cash. Chuck Berry didn't just play the guitar, he told stories with it. He wrote about cars, school, heartbreak, and dancing. His 1955 hit, Maybelline, was a game changer, combining fast guitar licks, narrative lyrics, and that signature showmanship. Born in St. Louis in 1926, Berry brought together blues structure with country storytelling. He was the full package: writer, singer, guitarist, and performer. The Beatles and Rolling Stones both covered his songs. Keith Richards once said, "Chuck Berry was the one who made me want to play guitar." He created the duckwalk. He made solos iconic. Without Chuck Berry, there's no blueprint for rock and roll. If Chuck Berry was the architect, Little Richard was the fireball. Wild, loud, gender-bending, unapologetically flamboyant. Born Richard Penniman in Georgia, he hit the scene in 1955 with Tutti Frutti, originally a raunchy blues tune, Tutti Frutti, Good Booty, that was cleaned up by songwriter Dorothy Labastri for radio. It was fast, unhinged, and dripping with energy. His screams, pounding piano, and sexual ambiguity scared parents and thrilled teenagers. Little Richard broke rules, not just musical ones. He wore makeup. He blurred gender lines. He was black, queer, and proud at a time when that was radical. He laid the foundation for everyone from Prince to Bowie to Freddie Mercury. Let's not forget other titans. Fats Domino from New Orleans brought warmth and rhythm with hits like Ain't That a Shame? His easygoing style made rock feel joyful. Bo Diddley introduced the Bo Diddley beat, a syncopated rhythm that became foundational in rock. He was also one of the first to craft his own guitars, shaping sound and image. Big Mama Thornton was another crucial figure. In 1952, she recorded Hound Dog, written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, 3 years before Elvis. Her version was rough, bluesy, and full of raw power. It topped the R&B charts, while Elvis's cover, inspired by a live version by Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys, became a sanitized global hit. Muddy Waters electrified the blues in Chicago, and his 1950 song Rollin' Stone inspired the name of a little British band you might have heard of. The Rolling Stones, along with the Beatles and The Who, would later repackage Black American music for a global audience. But the roots always traced back to artists like Muddy, Howlin' Wolf, and Sister Rosetta. Rock was never clean. It was messy, rebellious, often contradictory. It borrowed, it evolved, and yes, it sometimes stole. But even in its messiness, it gave voice to the misunderstood, to the outcasts, to the passionate. And that's what made it timeless. By the mid-1950s, rock and roll had become a cultural battleground. In the American South, many cities tried to ban it from being played in public venues, citing fears of it encouraging integration and delinquency. But the music kept spreading. Record stores saw an explosion in demand for rock records, and jukeboxes in diners across the country were blasting new hits every week. Television played a massive role in pushing rock and roll into the mainstream. Shows like The Ed Sullivan Show showcased artists like Elvis Presley, whose hip-swinging performance scandalized adults and electrified teens. These moments became landmarks in television history and proof of how rock was shaking up not just music, but media and generational identity. Behind the scenes, record producers and engineers like Tom Dowd at Atlantic Records and Sam Phillips at Sun were using innovative studio techniques that shaped how rock sounded. Multi-track recording, echo chambers, and microphone placement all played a part in the final product. Rock was not just evolving musically, it was becoming sonically richer through technology. By the time the 1970s rolled around, rock had splintered into subgenres. Psychedelic rock, hard rock, glam rock, and early punk were all branches of the same family tree. What unified them was their shared DNA, attitude, authenticity, and a relentless desire to challenge the status quo. Even today, in digital playlists and GarageBand demos, you can still hear those roots rumbling beneath the surface. If you're learning more here than you ever did in school, smash that like button like Little Richard slamming a piano. And if your parents told you Elvis invented rock and roll, send them this video, politely. Subscribe for part 2, where we tackle how the Beatles took rock global and how punk tried to burn it all down. In the 1960s, American rock crossed the ocean and came back louder. The Beatles, raised on Barry and Presley, took rock and added harmony, experimentation, and global fame. The Rolling Stones, named after Muddy Waters' song, channeled blues with swagger. The Who turned amps up to 11. Led Zeppelin made it mystical and heavy. British bands reinterpreted the music that Black Americans had built, and then sold it back to the US on an epic scale. What followed were decades of evolution: psychedelic rock, glam, punk, metal, grunge. Each new wave borrowed from those original roots. And still, when a young artist plugs in a guitar and screams into a mic, they're echoing the same spirit. So who really created rock and roll? It wasn't just one person, it wasn't even one race, or one country. It was a mosaic of voices: black and white, male and female, gospel and country, rhythm and blues. Sister Rosetta's Holy Fire, Chuck Berry's storytelling guitar, Little Richard's wail, Elvis Presley's charm, Alan Freed's microphone, Sam Phillips' open mind, Big Mama's growl, Muddy's electric soul. They didn't just make music. They started a fire that still burns today. Rock and roll is rebellion. It's rhythm. It's a voice for the voiceless. It started with soul. It got louder with time, and it still speaks to those who feel like outsiders. Because at its core, rock and roll isn't about chords or distortion. It's about freedom. And that never goes out of style.